The palace stretched like a city of mirrors and shadows. Its walls glimmered with gold and marble, yet the halls seemed darker than the night outside. Servants hurried through corridors, their voices low and hurried, afraid to make a sound that might anger the lords or the queen. But among them, there was one who never drew attention. She moved like a whisper. She spoke like a secret. She was Elara, the maid who everyone overlooked, the invisible shadow of the palace. No one remembered her name when they left a room. No one noticed when she swept the floors, polished the silver, or carried the candles to the highest towers. To the palace, she was nothing. To herself, she was everything: silent, careful, and alone. She had learned long ago that being invisible was safer than being seen. Elara's days were filled with chores, her nights with quiet wandering. She knew every hidden passage, every forgotten stair, every dusty corner where secrets slept. The palace held many mysteries, and Elara had a habit of noticing them all, but she had never dared to touch them. Curiosity could be dangerous in a place ruled by the Alpha King. Kale. King Kale was a man of power and fear. His presence filled the throne room like a storm before it broke. People whispered his name with reverence and fear. He was strong, clever, and ruthless when needed. But behind the crown, behind the walls of authority, he was haunted by a prophecy, a shadowed soul who could save or doom his bloodline. None had ever come close to fulfilling it. None, except perhaps the maid no one saw. It was a late evening when the balance of their quiet worlds shifted. Elara had gone to the East Wing, a part of the palace few servants dared to enter. Rumor said the walls there were cursed, filled with the echoes of past kings and queens who had angered the wrong spirits. She had been cleaning, her hands steady, her mind alert, when she heard a soft creak behind her. Before she could turn, the door opened, and light spilled into the chamber. She froze, heart pounding, as a tall figure stepped in. King Kale. His dark eyes scanned the room, sharp as a hawk's. He did not see her at first, for she was small, quiet, and careful. But when she moved, even slightly, he looked up, and his gaze fell upon her. Elara realized, with a jolt of fear, that he had walked in on her changing. She had not expected anyone to enter this hidden room. Her cheeks burned with embarrassment. She wanted to vanish into the shadows, to sink into the floor and disappear completely. But she could not move, could not speak. She was trapped by the sudden awareness of the Alpha King staring at her, and by a strange, inexplicable feeling she could not name. Kale did not speak. He did not move. For a long moment, he only looked, and Elara felt something shift inside him, something curious, almost tender, that he did not show to anyone. It was as if he saw her, not as a servant, not as invisible, but as someone real, someone vital. Fear and fascination battled inside her. She had always known that the king was dangerous, that his anger could destroy lives in an instant, yet here he was, and something in his gaze made her feel less like a shadow, less like nothing. Finally, Kale stepped back. "Go," he said, his voice low, a command wrapped in something softer, almost hesitant. Elara did not need to be told twice. She hurried out, her heart hammering, her mind a storm of thoughts. Why had he not shouted at her? Why had he not punished her? And most importantly, why did she feel an unexplainable pull toward him, even as she ran to her room to hide? The days that followed were different. Kale did not speak to her directly, but he watched. From the balcony, from the throne room, even from shadowed corridors, his eyes followed her. Elara noticed, at first with fear, then with a strange thrill. She was not used to being seen. And yet, she could not stop noticing the king's presence, the way he moved with power, with control, yet with a subtle grace that few ever noticed. Elara's mind could not rest. Every corner of the palace seemed alive with whispers now. She sensed hidden forces at work, threads of magic that had long been ignored. She felt them in her hands when she touched the cold walls, In her ears when she passed the dark corridors, something ancient stirred, something that connected her to Kale in ways neither of them understood. The other servants noticed nothing. They continued their routines, busy with their chores, afraid to step out of line. But Alara walked among them differently. She moved with a new awareness, aware that the palace was not just halls and rooms, it was a living, breathing entity. And she was part of it now, whether she wanted to be or not. One evening, under the pale light of a crescent moon, Kale entered the east wing again. He did not announce himself. The shadows seemed to welcome him, bending around his figure like obedient servants. Alara froze behind a column, her heart hammering. "Why do you linger here, Maid?" Kale asked, his voice calm but not unkind. "This wing is not for you." Alara stepped out slowly, her eyes meeting his. I was just cleaning. Your Majesty," she whispered. Kale studied her. There was something in her eyes that he could not ignore. Fear, yes, but also intelligence, courage, and a strange spark he had not seen in anyone else. "You are not like the others," he said softly, almost to himself. "You are—" Ilara's breath caught. No one had ever said such a thing. She had been invisible her whole life. And now the king saw her. Not just her form, not just her role, but her essence, and it terrified her more than his anger ever could. The hours passed as they stood in the quiet, empty wing, the only sound the faint hum of the palace settling. Kale finally turned to leave, pausing at the door. "Remember this," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to echo in her chest. "I will not forget you. And neither will the palace. Perhaps it is time that shadows learned to step into the light." Alara watched him leave, her body trembling, her mind racing. The invisible maid had been seen. The Alpha King had noticed her, and in that instant, she felt a dangerous mix of fear and hope, fear for what recognition might bring, and hope that perhaps her life was no longer bound to the edges of the palace, unseen and ignored. That night, as she lay awake in her tiny room, Alara realized that everything had changed. The palace no longer felt safe, but neither did it feel small. It was alive with magic, with secrets, and now, with possibility. And somewhere deep in the heart of the castle, Kale's eyes lingered on her even when she could not see him. For the first time in her life, Alara was no longer invisible. And the king, the ruler who had never known fear of anything, had glimpsed a shadow that could alter everything. The night air whispered through the corridors, carrying with it a promise and a warning. The palace had noticed the invisible maid, and the invisible maid had noticed the king. Something had begun, something neither of them could yet name, and it would change the destiny of the kingdom forever. The palace never truly slept. Even in the dead of night, the corridors murmured with whispers, some human, some older than any living soul in the castle. Alara felt it every time she moved through the halls. The walls were alive, remembering every step, every shadow, every secret. She had once believed she was invisible, untouchable. Now, after the king's eyes had found her, that fragile certainty had vanished. Kale did not speak to her directly in public. The court was full of eyes, ears, and whispers, and he was a master of control. But she knew his gaze followed her. She could sense it from distant corridors, from the balcony above, from the throne room itself. It was as if he was studying her, silently testing her, and she, for the first time, felt that being seen could be both terrifying and exhilarating. Alara moved with caution. Her tasks continued sweeping, cleaning, lighting the halls, but now, she carried a heightened awareness. Each gesture, each footstep, each whispered breath might catch his attention. She had never been noticed before, never truly considered important. And now, she was. One evening, the palace was unusually quiet. The servants had gone to their quarters, the guards patrolled with cautious diligence, and the moonlight spilled across the marble floors. Alara had gone to the east wing to inspect a set of old tapestries that seemed to shift in the faint light. She paused, tracing her fingers across the woven faces of kings and queens long gone. Something in her chest stirred a strange energy she could not explain. "Careful, Maid," a voice said, deep and controlled. Elara spun, her heart pounding, and found Kale standing in the doorway. He did not move quickly, nor did he startle her. His presence was steady, imposing. Yet there was a hint of curiosity in his dark eyes that made her throat tight. "You should not be here," he said, his tone calm but carrying authority. "This wing is forbidden to servants. You know that. I was just checking the tapestries," she stammered. They seem strange." Kale stepped closer, his gaze examining not just the room but her. "They are strange because they remember," he said softly, almost to himself. "Everything in this palace remembers. And perhaps you are meant to remember more than most." Elara's hands trembled. "Remember me?" she asked, unsure of the words. Kale shook his head slowly. "Not you. Not yet. But shadows like you. They are rarely seen for what they truly are." There was a pause, long and quiet, in which the palace seemed to lean closer, listening. Elara felt the air shift, as if something invisible had stirred. She sensed the magic in the walls, the whispers of old kings and queens, the pulse of an unseen force connecting her to the king. It made her both afraid and curious. "You are unlike anyone I have ever known," Kael said finally. "Quiet, careful, invisible to all, yet visible to the things that matter." Elara did not speak. She could not. The words felt too large, too dangerous. She only nodded, feeling her heart race in a way it never had before. Kale's eyes softened ever so slightly. "The palace changes when you are near. I see it. And I cannot ignore it." Elara wanted to ask what he meant, wanted to say that she was nothing, that she was just a maid, and that the king had far greater concerns than her existence. But something in his gaze held her silent. She felt an unspoken bond forming a connection neither fully understood, yet impossible to ignore. Days passed, and Kale's attention became more apparent. Small gestures, his eyes lingering as she passed. A subtle tilt of his head when she entered a room. A quiet observation from across the hall made her pulse quicken. She felt drawn to him, yet frightened. He was the Alpha King, the ruler of all. And she was a servant, who had never been noticed by anyone. Their worlds were not meant to collide, and yet, they did. One afternoon, a disturbance in the palace caught both their attention. A hidden corridor, long forgotten, had been disturbed by an unseen force. Kale went to investigate, and Elara, despite herself, followed. She moved silently behind him, aware of every step, every sound, every shadow that flickered across the walls. The corridor led to a small chamber, filled with strange artifacts, ancient mirrors, cursed books, and relics that seemed to hum with their own energy. Elara stepped closer to a mirror, its surface dark and swirling like liquid night. As her fingers touched it, the mirror seemed to respond, pulsing faintly under her hand. Kale watched, his expression unreadable. "Do not touch it," he warned. "It is not safe. I just wanted to see," Elara whispered. "It feels alive." Kale's eyes softened, but there was a warning in his tone. "It is alive because it feeds on what you are afraid to see. And it has noticed you." Elara shivered. The mirror reflected not just her image but something else. A shadow moving behind her. A faint flicker of something ancient and knowing. She pulled back, heart racing. Kale stepped forward, placing a hand on her shoulder. It was a gesture of protection, yet it carried power and authority. "You have strength," he said quietly, "stronger than you know. But strength without understanding can be dangerous. Promise me you will be careful." I promise," she said, though her voice trembled. She was learning that being seen by the king was a dangerous gift, one that could awaken forces she did not fully understand. Over the next days, Kale found excuses to test her, to observe her courage and intelligence. He would ask questions in passing. Watch how she responded to unexpected tasks, and see how she moved through the palace under pressure. Elara learned to meet his gaze with quiet confidence, even as her heart raced with fear, and something far more complicated, an unspoken attraction, a pull she could neither name nor resist. At night, when the palace slept and the corridors were empty, she would hear whispers from the mirrors, the walls, and the artifacts, strange voices, sometimes warning, sometimes encouraging, sometimes merely observing, and she realized, with a mix of awe and terror, that she was not just a maid. She was part of something much larger, something that connected her to the king and to the palace itself. One stormy night, lightning flashed across the windows, illuminating the chamber where Kale and Elara had met days before. She had gone there to tidy and inspect the mirrors. The storm made the air feel alive, electric with possibility. Kale appeared without a sound, his cloak damp from the rain outside. He did not speak at first. He simply watched her, the way one might observe a rare flower growing in darkness. "You are braver than I expected," he said finally. "And clever. You notice what others do not." Elara's breath caught. I have always tried to be careful, to be unnoticed." "You will not be unnoticed anymore," Kale said softly. "Not by me. Not by this palace. Not by the forces that stir in these walls." Her heart pounded. The invisible maid, who had lived in shadows her whole life, was no longer unseen, and the Alpha King, feared by all, had chosen to notice her, to test her, to draw her into a world far beyond what she had known. The storm raged on outside, but inside the palace, a different kind of storm had begun, one of power, curiosity, and the first flickers of something dangerous and beautiful between them. And in that storm, Elara realized a truth that both thrilled and terrified her. She could no longer remain invisible. She had been seen by the king, and something deep within the palace and within herself had awakened. The palace had grown colder, not from the weather, but from something older, darker. Shadows stretched longer along the corridors, twisting unnaturally, and the mirrors no longer reflected the world as it truly was. Elara felt it every time she moved through the halls, a quiet, pulsing energy that whispered secrets only she seemed to hear. She had always been careful, invisible in the ways that mattered. But now, her awareness of the palace's hidden life made her feel exposed in ways that terrified her. Kale had not spoken of the mirrors since the storm, yet his presence was always near. He did not announce himself, but she could sense his eyes following her movements, as if watching her, even when she thought she was alone. There was no malice in his gaze, only a careful study, a curiosity, and an unspoken respect that left her both unsettled and drawn to him. One evening, as dusk painted the palace in shades of blood and gold, a faint sound echoed from the forbidden east wing. Elara's instincts pulled her forward. She was no longer merely curious, she felt responsible. Whatever was stirring in the palace, she was connected to it, and she could no longer ignore that fact. Kale appeared behind her, silent as a shadow. "You should not go alone," he said softly. "I cannot ignore it," she replied. Her voice, steady but low, carried more confidence than she had known she possessed. "Something is awakening, and I can feel it." He studied her, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something unexpected in his eyes, vulnerability. "Very well," he said after a long pause, "but stay close. There are forces here older than both of us, and they will not hesitate to destroy what they cannot control." Together, they entered the east wing. The air grew heavier with each step, the walls seeming to hum in resonance with some ancient energy. The mirrors that lined the hall pulsed faintly, reflecting not just their images but shadows that moved of their own accord. Elara's hand brushed a mirror, and it shivered under her touch, dark ripples traveling across its surface like water disturbed by a stone. "You are not just a maid," Kale whispered, his voice low and urgent. "I feel it now more than ever. You have power, power I cannot command. Power the palace recognizes." Elara swallowed hard. She had felt the energy, yes, but hearing Kale acknowledge it made her pulse quicken. I don't understand it," she admitted. I just feel things. I feel the palace, its secrets, its pain. Kale nodded slowly. That is why you are here. That is why the prophecy whispered of a shadowed soul. You are not invisible to this palace, or to me. But that does not mean you are safe. Suddenly, a mirror flared with light, brighter than the moon, and a shadow emerged from its surface. It was a figure, spectral and glowing, with eyes like embers. Elara froze, fear gripping her. Kale stepped in front of her, his hand resting lightly on the hilt of his sword, though his gaze never left her. "Do not be afraid," he said, voice steady but commanding. "I will protect you. But face it. You cannot run from this. It has recognized you." The shadow spoke, its voice a low echo that reverberated through the hall. "The shadow awakens, and the key has been found. She is more than a maid. She is the one the prophecy foretold. Yet, will she rise or fall?" Elara's heart thundered. She had always believed herself to be nothing, unnoticed, invisible. Now, the palace itself declared her important, and the king, who had always been untouchable, now stood beside her, trusting her, relying on her courage. Kale's hand brushed her shoulder lightly, a gesture of reassurance. "Do not doubt yourself. Your power is part of you, but it is also part of the palace. You are its keeper now, whether you accept it or not." Elara took a shaky breath. "But what if I fail?" "You will not," Kale said firmly. "Not while I stand with you." Together, they advanced, the shadow leading them to a chamber hidden deep within the east wing. The room was circular, lined with ancient stones engraved with runes that pulsed faintly under their steps. At its center was a pedestal, and upon it rested a crystal, glowing softly, filled with swirling colors of fire and storm. "The heart of the palace," Kale whispered. "The source of its curse, and its salvation. Only one with the strength to see it, and the courage to wield it, can break what binds us all." Elara stepped closer, drawn as if by invisible threads. Her fingers hovered above the crystal, and the energy surged through her, warm and terrifying. She felt the whispers of the palace in her mind, voices from centuries past, urging her forward, guiding her hands. "You can do this," Kale said, his voice close, almost in her ear. "Trust yourself. Trust me. Trust what you are." Tears pricked her eyes. For the first time, she understood that her invisibility had been a preparation, not a punishment. She had been hidden, unnoticed, trained by circumstance, readying her for this moment when she would no longer be a shadow but a force to be reckoned with. With a deep breath, Elara touched the crystal. Light exploded around them, filling the chamber with warmth and power. The runes glowed brighter, the shadows recoiled, and the palace itself seemed to sigh in relief. But the crystal reacted violently, pulsing in ways that felt almost alive. A shockwave of energy threw Elara backward, and Kale caught her in his arms. "You are stronger than I imagined," he said, voice low but filled with awe. "But it is only the beginning. The palace tests those who touch its heart. You must learn to control it, or it will consume you." Elara's chest heaved, her body trembling from the surge of power. I don't know if I can," she admitted, fear and wonder mingling in her voice. Kale held her steady. "You can. I will help you. I will not let you face this alone." The moment between them was quiet but heavy with meaning. She had always been invisible, a shadow in the palace. But now, in his arms, she felt seen, valued, and powerful. She realized that the bond forming between them was more than fear or curiosity. It was trust, reliance, and something deeper, something unspoken but undeniable. The shadows of the room shifted once more. The spectral figure appeared at the edge of the chamber, its eyes glowing brighter. "The key has awakened, but the path is perilous," it intoned. "Choices must be made. Sacrifices. must follow. The crude, Elara shivered, understanding the weight of the words. The palace, the king, and her own destiny were now intertwined. The power within her was a gift, but also a responsibility. One wrong step, one moment of doubt, could unravel everything she had worked toward, everything Kale had placed his trust in. Kale looked down at her, his hand still steady on her shoulder. "Whatever comes, we face it together," he said. "The palace will not take you. Not while I can stand." Elara met his gaze, her own fear mingling with determination. She had spent her life hiding, avoiding attention, surviving in the shadows. Now, she was ready to step into the light, not just as a maid, not just as a shadow, but as a force the palace itself could not ignore. And in that moment, as the storm of energy settled and the chamber quieted, they both understood that the true challenge had only just begun. The palace had awakened, and with it, the prophecy, the magic, and the shadowed secrets that would test them both. Elara drew a deep breath, feeling the power of the crystal still humming in her veins. She was no longer invisible. The palace had chosen her. The king had chosen her, and now, the invisible maid must rise, not just to survive, but to protect, to lead, and to reclaim the destiny that had been waiting for her all along. The palace was alive in a way it had never been before. Shadows moved along the walls like living creatures, whispering secrets from centuries past. The air trembled with magic, thick and heavy, and the distant echoes of the storm outside seemed to mirror the turmoil within. Elara had never felt anything so alive, so dangerous, and yet so compelling. She knew that this was the moment everything would change, not just for her, but for the entire kingdom. Kale walked beside her, his cloak brushing the marble floors, silent and steady. There was no hesitation in his step, only determination. But Elara could sense the weight of the palace upon him. He was the Alpha King, feared by all, yet the prophecy, the mirrors, and the shadowed forces had made him vulnerable. And now, she would not let him face it alone. They reached the chamber at the heart of the palace, the room where the crystal lay, glowing softly even in the absence of direct light. The energy radiating from it pulsed through the stones, the mirrors, and even through the king's armor. Elara felt it coil in her chest, a mixture of fear and power. She had touched the crystal before, but this time it felt different. It was no longer a test of courage, it was a test of will. "The palace is restless," Kael said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "It knows you have awakened, and it will not yield easily. You must face it, Elara, not as a servant, not as a shadow, but as its equal." Elara swallowed hard. I am afraid," she admitted, voice trembling. "What if I fail? What if I cannot control it?" Kael stepped closer, his hand brushing hers lightly. "Then I will stand with you. But you must believe in yourself. You have carried this power all your life without knowing it. Now, it is time to claim it." The crystal flared with light, reacting to her presence. Shadows moved violently across the walls, forming shapes that resembled the faces of kings, queens, and warriors long dead. Whispers swirled in the air, some warning, some pleading, some demanding. Elara felt herself pulled in every direction at once. It was overwhelming, but she remembered Kael's words, his trust in her, and the connection that had grown between them over these past days. Taking a deep breath, she reached out again. This time, she did not hesitate. Her fingers touched the crystal, and a shockwave of energy surged through the room. The shadows shrieked and twisted, the mirrors rattled, and the walls seemed to sigh. Elara felt every memory, every curse, every sorrow of the palace flowing into her. For a moment, she feared she would be consumed. Kael placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "You are stronger than they are," he said firmly. "Do not let them control you. Control yourself, and the palace will follow." Elara closed her eyes, focusing on the energy within her. She let it flow through her, rather than against her. Slowly, she began to command it, guiding it with her thoughts, her emotions, and her will. The shadows hesitated, then retreated, curling back into the corners of the room. The crystal's light stabilized, no longer threatening but harmonious. The palace, in that moment, seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. The oppressive weight that had lingered for centuries lifted, replaced by a calm that was almost sacred. Elara opened her eyes, seeing Kale watching her with awe and pride. She had not only survived, it seemed she had tamed the heart of the palace itself. Kale stepped closer, and for the first time, the distance between them felt unimportant. "You did it," he said softly. "The palace, the curse, it bends to you. And yet, you did not just conquer it, you freed it." Ilara's chest heaved with exhaustion and triumph. I could not have done it alone," she admitted. Her gaze met his. And in that moment, the invisible maid felt something shift within her. A sense of belonging, of recognition, of power tempered by love and trust. Kael's hand brushed hers again, and this time it lingered. "You are no longer invisible, Ilara. You never were. I only see what the palace always knew, that you are extraordinary." Her heart fluttered, a mix of fear and warmth. For so long, she had been unnoticed, a shadow among shadows. Now, she stood in the center of the palace, the crystal's light reflecting off her face, and the king, the Alpha King, looked at her not as a servant, not as someone beneath him, but as a partner, a force to be reckoned with. They moved together out of the chamber, the palace around them still whispering but no longer threatening. The shadows had learned to bend to her will, the mirrors no longer shimmered with malicious intent, and the energy that once oppressed the halls now seemed alive with possibility. As they walked through the corridors, Kale spoke softly, almost to himself. The prophecy, it spoke of a shadowed soul who could save or doom the kingdom. "It seems it was never about me. It was about her." Ilara looked at him, a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty in her eyes. "And you?" she asked. "Where do you fit in all of this?" Kale's expression softened. "I am a king bound by duty, by blood, and by the weight of a crown. But you are the future. And I am yours to stand beside. Not above, not below, but beside." Tears pricked her eyes. She had never imagined that she, a maid once invisible to the world, could hold such power, such responsibility, and such connection to someone like Kale. And yet, standing there in the glowing light of the crystal's remnants, she felt it, her courage, her strength, and the bond that had grown between them. Suddenly, a soft whisper echoed through the palace. Not threatening, not angry, but gentle, almost approving. "The shadow has risen, and the light follows." Ilara's hand found Kale's, their fingers intertwining naturally. The palace had tested them, the curse had challenged them, and together, they had overcome. They were no longer the maid and the king, the shadow and the ruler. They were equals, partners, bound by trust, courage, and the magic that had chosen her. Kale's gaze met hers, dark and steady. "Whatever comes next," he said, "we face it together. The palace, the prophecy, the shadows, they are ours to guide now." Ilara nodded, her heart swelling with a mixture of relief, pride, and something deeper, an unspoken bond that went beyond fear or magic. "Together," she whispered. The palace seemed to hum in agreement, as if acknowledging their unity. The corridors no longer felt oppressive. The shadows no longer whispered threats. Instead, there was balance, harmony, and a promise that while challenges would always come, they would face them as one. The night outside had cleared. Moonlight streamed through the windows, bathing the marble floors in silver. For the first time, Ilara felt at peace in the palace that had once been a cage of shadows. She had faced the darkness, tamed the magic, and claimed her place not just as a maid, not just as a shadow, but as someone indispensable to the kingdom, and to the king who had seen her for who she truly was. Kale stepped closer, his presence both commanding and comforting. "The palace is no longer bound by the past," he said, "and neither are we." Ilara smiled faintly, feeling the weight of the past lift from her shoulders. She had been invisible, overlooked, forgotten, but no longer. She had found her power, her courage, and the trust of the king who had walked into the wrong room and seen her not as she appeared, but as she truly was. And in that moment, she knew. Invisibility had been her shield, her secret, and her preparation. Now, she was ready to step fully into the light, alongside the man who had changed her world, and with the palace that had chosen her as its guardian. The wind rustled through the open windows, carrying a faint whisper, soft, almost playful. The shadow walks in light now, and the story has only just begun. Ilara looked at Kyle, their fingers still entwined, and she felt a smile curve her lips. Whatever the future held, they would face it together. The invisible maid was no more. The Alpha King had found his equal, and the kingdom had found its hope. The palace, once dark and fearful, now glowed with the promise of renewal, courage, and the unstoppable bond between two souls who had dared to rise above fear and shadows.